Hey guys, what's up? Today I'll be doing a video going over 5 of my favorite death metal guitarists. And I got this idea for this video by another metal YouTuber named Julian Gonzalez, who counted down his 5 favorite death metal guitarists. And he had a really cool list. Definitely go check it out. And my list, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm just doing 5 of my favorite death metal guitarists, not my definitive top 5, because I just couldn't narrow it down to 5, and I just couldn't give it the tag of the top 5 in my opinion. So this is just 5 of my favorite, and also he had a really good list, and I tried not to repeat any of the same guitarists, but I did fail. There was just one guitarist that I absolutely had to have on my list, but other than that, they are all 4 new guitarists. So starting off this list at number 5 is Paul Riddell from Blood Incantation, Spectral Voice, and Chthonic Deity, and some other various projects. And I know he's a bit of a more modern guitarist compared to the other guys I'm going to have in this list, but I definitely feel like he needs to be on this list in my opinion. He just does some of the best riffs, and I pulled out this CD specifically because I think this is his best guitar work that I've heard so far. I mean, it's awesome. I know some of the other guys contributed on here, but according to the credits, he wrote song 1 and song 3 all by himself, which is the two Vitrification of Blood Part 1 and Part 2. And those are actually my 2 favorite songs on this album, as well as Vitrification of Blood Part 1 being my favorite Blood Incantation song. I mean, the riffs on there are just both heavy, but also they have this like magical and super heavy atmosphere ridden type of style. You know, a lot of use of harmonics, and as well as like some variety in a lot of shapes. You know, not just using power chords, using some different stuff. I know they play in drop tuning, so that gives them a little bit of a more different range and like the big chords they can hit, especially on some of the more drawn out like open sections that he writes. And I just think his writing is absolutely brilliant. And I know Blood Incantation is a band where everyone and their mother just has an opinion or something to say about this band, whether it be good or bad. And I'm definitely on the good side. I mean, I am a huge fanboy over this band, I'm not going to lie. And I love Paul's guitar work. And, you know, Spectral Voice, of course, just being absolutely terrifying death doom, and the way he can write riffs both in this style and the Spectral Voice style, as well as a bit of the more straightforward style in Chthonic Deity. He's just an all-around really solid guitarist, and even though he's a bit more modern, I definitely have full confidence in saying that he can make my list. So number 5, Paul Riddell of Blood Incantation, Spectral Voice, etc., etc. And coming in at number 4 is Jeremy Wagner of Broken Hope, and the album I chose to show is Battles of Repugnance. And I'm just kind of choosing an album where I think their guitar work is really highlighted or cool. And I think I haven't quite made up my mind about Broken Hope's discography, but I think this is probably my favorite Broken Hope album, at least at this moment. I mean, just super, super crushing and absolutely awesome riffs. Broken Hope, of course, is kind of like proto brutal death metal. I mean, it is brutal death metal, but it's like really early brutal death metal, and they just do it right. And Jeremy Wagner has been the long-standing member of Broken Hope that has held this band together, and all his guitar work from the early days to even their newer stuff I really enjoy. But something about this album really stands out. I mean, you got the fast tremolo pick parts, but also the super crushing breakdowns. And I think the vocalist on here, Joe, his style just goes perfectly with Jeremy Wagner's riffs. And I mean, this is an absolutely crazy album. If you haven't heard this, definitely check this out, because you know, the riffs, they are pretty straightforward, but they get the job done, and they get the job done in the best possible way. Yeah, this is one of the best 90s death metal albums for sure. So number 4 on this list is Jeremy Wagner of Broken Hope. Absolutely awesome guitar playing. And coming in at number 3, this is the repeat guitarist that I absolutely had to include in my list. Terence Hobbs of the New York Legends Suffocation. Yeah, these guys are just, this album too, the blueprint, of course, for brutal and for technical death metal. And Suffocation is kind of that bridge where it's like, it's really technical for death metal, but it's not quite in that realm of like just pure technicality, because they mix that with like simplistic brutality and just all around really well balanced riffs. And Terence is a great riff writer. I know Doug, the other guitarist, contributed some stuff on here, but Terence's body of work throughout his entire Suffocation career is just crazy. And the first 3 Suffocation albums, I think, are all equally as awesome in riffs. But this is the only one I own, so I pulled out this one. But I would probably say Pierce From Within is my favorite. I mean, that so many good breakdowns, so many good fast riffs, and probably some of their most technical stuff on Pierce From Within. But you know, Effigy's got a bunch of the fan favorites and a bunch of the killer riffs. I mean, I remember the Legion of Veracity was the first Suffocation song I ever heard, the opener on this album, and I was just floored with the chaotic sense that Terence Hobbs can bring to his riff writing. I mean, if you watch them live or if you try to learn any of their guitar riffs, it's crazy. It feels like they hit every note on the fretboard within the first like 45 seconds. And I mean, you just got really good use of like both chromaticism, but also just like really crazy and almost epic sounding like breakdowns, not in like a melodic sense, just super like crushing, really good use of like build up, tension, and release. I think that's what Effigy does best out of any Suffocation release. Like just the way they hit their breakdowns, how they build it up beforehand, I think is really impressive. And I have to give all the credit in the world to Terence Hobbs for basically, Terence Hobbs and Suffocation basically creating and launching off their own subgenre of death metal. You know, brutal death metal, these guys are basically the founders, spawned so many influences and all that great stuff. They really just did amazing things for pioneering the genre of brutal death metal. So number 3, Terence Hobbs of the legendary Suffocation. Coming in at the number 2 spot is Luke Lemay from Gorguts. And everything he's done in Gorguts, both from the early days of them playing old school death metal through the avant-garde death metal and all the way up to, you know, Colored Sands and Pleiades Dust. Man, Luke Lemay is an absolutely incredible guitarist. And everything he seems to do is just so brilliant and capturing. It's really catchy, but it's also just really smart music in its own unique way. And if you start at his old school days, you know, Consider Dead and the Erosion of Sanity, that is probably my favorite riffing in old school death metal, only topped by the number 1 spot, which I'll get to later. And I mean, such killer, great old school riffs. And I think Consider Dead is actually a pretty unique death metal album. I think a lot of people tend to say it's a really good album, but it's not great or that unique. But I've always felt differently. I think the first 2 Gorguts albums for old school death metal are very unique, especially Consider Dead, because they just got these really eerie melodies, which I think not many bands were doing at the time. And they did it to an extent where, like, if you're not really listening to the music, it can kind of go over your head. But if you really take a listen to the melodies, just super morbid sounding death metal. That's the best way I can describe it. And then, of course, Erosion of Sanity is really, really technical. And I also think that album does not get enough credit for being influenced in brutal death metal. I mean, Broken Hope, Suffocation, those bands get a lot of the early credit, but I think Erosion of Sanity had a lot of impact on later brutal death metal, especially just take a look at some of the riffing in that song. If you learn it on guitar, you can just totally see like, oh yeah, I recognize other bands using these shapes or this style of riffing. And then, of course, Obscura and From Wisdom to Hate, really, really cool avant-garde death metal. And yeah, I just think, especially Obscura and From Wisdom to Hate, such smart songwriting. Like, this album is pretty out there in terms of like song structures and all that stuff. But like From Wisdom to Hate, you have all the strangeness and dissonance of Obscura, but you also have sometimes like really simple song structures, which I think is pretty cool. You get this like juxtaposition between this crazy dissonant technical style of avant-garde riffing with really familiar and like almost sometimes pop style like song structures, which makes it kind of accessible, which I think was really smart with what he did. And of course, I could go on about Luke Lemay for hours, but Colored Sands, Pleiades Dust, both absolutely great guitar work and great songwriter. I think he's probably the best songwriter on this list. He's just an absolute legend. So, number 2, Luke Lemay of Gorguts. And now taking the number 1 spot. I know I said this wasn't ranked like my 5 favorite. It was just 5 of my favorites, but that being said, this number 1 spot, I would say, is my favorite guitar player in all of death metal. John McIntyre of Incantation. Oh my god, I don't even know where to start with this riff style. I absolutely love it, and it's a huge influence on me when I write music for my band. I just think there's so much character to his riffs, and there was a lot of albums I could have shown and talked about, and I chose the debut, Onward to Golgotha, just because some of my favorite songs are on here, but also I think this is the best example of Incantation's really like dissonant riffing, like how they'll be able to go from like really slow doomy sections and just kick it straight into super scary dissonant sounding guitar riffs. And they also just have like some super, what's the word, like the riffs just are absurd and don't even make sense. A couple come to mind, like the verse riff of Golgotha, from Mortal Throne of Nazarene, the verse riff, An Emaciated Holy Figure. Like, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, just if you play guitar, check out one of those guitar tabs and you'll be like, what the hell? But in the best way, just super crazy, chaotic, all over the fretboard type of riffing. And, also Incantation, on top of the speed, they can bring that super doom and slowed down approach of death metal, which is what makes them one of my favorite death metal bands. And, this is just John McIntyre. I really respect him, both as a guitarist, but just as a band leader. Him and this band, I really look up to them a lot, especially for my own projects, just because such a big influence on me. And, so many great riffs on here. Blasphemous Cremation, Christening the Afterbirth. Really, really killer death metal. And I think John McIntyre also like pioneered his own style of using pinch harmonics. For some reason, if you pinch harmonic in a certain shape or in a certain rhythm, it just like really screams Incantation to me. Like, especially to use an example, pinch harmonicking like anything. You start at a note and you pinch harmonic an interval up on a tritone. Like, just doing that, I just always think of Incantation, no matter what band does it. And like the way they hit their harmonics, like just super squealy, I think that's awesome. And John McIntyre is definitely just really like set the bar for this style of riffing. And I think a lot of people, including myself, have taken so much influence from Incantation and their riffing style. And yeah, it's just overall really killer, crushing death metal. I mean, you got the slow parts, the fast parts, the dissonance, everything in between. Yeah, so taking the number 1 spot for my favorite guitar player in death metal, and rounding off this 5 of my favorite guitar player list will be John McIntyre from Incantation. So yeah, whoa, that almost fell. That would not have been good. Thanks for watching.